The first warning came as a subtle flicker across the quantum sensor array, a pattern too precise to be random. Dr. Alara Voss, hunched over the console in the observation deck of the research cruiser Etherian, watched the numbers spike in ways no standard model could explain. The readings weren't just anomalies, they were signatures of alternate dimensional interference, ripples in reality itself. Somewhere out there, perhaps just beyond the quantum horizon, something or someone was intruding. Captain Arik Thorn stood behind her, eyes narrowed, fingers tapping rhythmically against the railing. He had learned long ago that impatience was wasted on mysteries like this. "Alara, define interference," he said, voice clipped, military precise. "It's hard to quantify, sir. The resonance patterns suggest multiple realities overlapping, but it's not destructive. Yet. Not fully. But the intervals, they're consistent, calculable. If we don't act, we might only notice the collapse when it's too late." Thorn rubbed his jaw. He hated being in the dark, hated standing on the bridge like a man awaiting a storm without knowing whether it would be lightning or a hurricane. His tactical mind sought certainty. "And our advantage?" Alara shook her head. "We have none. If these alternate realities, entities, are aware of us, they move faster, see us before we see them. Any direct confrontation is suicidal." Commander Soren Kale, the Etherian's operations officer, leaned into the console, pulling up orbital maps and quantum disturbance vectors. "We have sensor echoes, small, but they cluster near the solstice rift. If we extrapolate the patterns," he hesitated, frowning at the projections, "they're converging on our sector. Estimates suggest contact in under 6 hours." The room went silent, the hum of the ship's fusion cores the only background sound. 6 hours, enough time to plan, or to prepare for slaughter. Alara spoke, her voice low. "They're not like anything we've faced. Not aliens, not rogue AI. These are quantum-level entities. Their presence affects probability. Cause and effect bend around them." Thorn's jaw tightened. "So, we fight ghosts?" "Worse," said Kale. "Well, we fight possibilities." The Etherian shuddered as it entered the outer sector of the rift. Sensors flared, shielding recalibrated, and drones were launched to map the interference zones. Lieutenant Mira Juno, piloting the survey drones, commented over the comm, her voice tight with adrenaline. "Captain, the readings are behaving like they're watching us. I'm seeing vectors that shouldn't exist, trajectories that contradict physics. Whatever's there, it's learning," Thorn exhaled sharply. "We adapt. Soren, Alara, make the impossible calculable. Mira, keep the eyes open. We survive by knowing more than it does. That's our advantage." The first skirmish began with no warning. A lattice of light shimmered against the ship's shields, phasing in and out as if the universe itself were glitching. Weapon systems tried to lock, but the targeting matrices flickered between multiple probability paths. Missiles launched only to vanish mid-flight, reappearing somewhere else, or not at all. Kinetic rounds seemed to hit nothing and simultaneously impact the hull in invisible bursts. The crew scrambled, recalculating with each microsecond, sweat beating at temples and palms. Alara's mind raced, fingers flying across the console. "They're reacting to our inputs before they occur. Our weapons, our movements, predictable within milliseconds, but not perfectly. There's a pattern, subtle. If we can exploit the phase variance..." Thorn leaned over her shoulder. "Do it, and keep me alive while you experiment." For nearly 20 minutes, the Etherian danced in the shifting currents of the rift, evading attacks that should have been instantaneous death. It was a ballet of chaos, a test of reflex and foresight. Then Kale shouted, "I've got it. Phase offset vector, 0.0032 probability delta. Fire at 37 degrees relative to our last vector. Now." Missiles streaked, vanishing mid-space only to erupt in a lattice of shimmering interference around a converging mass of light. There was a flash, a concussion that rattled the deck, and silence, pregnant, suffocating silence. The Etherian's sensors reported a void where the anomalies had coalesced moments ago. Thorn exhaled a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "Status?" "All systems nominal, Captain," said Kale, though his voice carried an undercurrent of disbelief. "But we only got one chance. That wasn't a defeat, it was a warning. And they know we exist." Alara tapped the console, eyes scanning the residual patterns. "It's adaptive. Our success here didn't destroy it. It learned from our maneuver. Next time, the margin for error will be smaller, much smaller." Thorn closed his eyes for a moment, the weight of command pressing down. Every human instinct to scream, to fight back, to assert dominance, but these were not conventional foes. They couldn't be bargained with, outgunned, or outflanked in any standard way. Victory required ingenuity, and every second wasted increased the odds of annihilation. Mira Juno's voice crackled over the comm again, sharp. "Captain, I'm seeing another ripple. It's forming faster, stronger, and It's centered on the Solstice relay station. If it breaches, the communications hub will collapse, and we lose quantum telemetry completely. Thorn's eyes snapped open. Then we move there. Full throttle. Shield integrity first, evasive channel second. Kale, reroute all non-essential power to propulsion and defensive matrices. Ilara, calculate every possible trajectory using the last encounter as a baseline. Mira, keep our eyes on the rift. We're going to hit them before they hit the relay. As the Etherian accelerated, the rift shimmered around them like liquid metal, space bending in subtle, nauseating curves. The crew felt it in their bones. The universe itself was no longer a stable arena. This was a battlefield of probability, a war fought not with force alone, but with foresight, improvisation, and the courage to gamble against the impossible. In the observation deck, Ilara's hand hovered over a console as a new set of anomalies appeared. They twisted and fractured like shards of mirrored glass suspended in the void, each fragment reflecting versions of the crew, of the Etherian, of the cosmos that might be. "Captain," she whispered, voice trembling despite her trained composure. If we fail, the consequences aren't just death. Entire probability streams could collapse. Alternate realities could merge into chaos. Thorn gritted his teeth. Then we don't fail. The ship lurched as the first assault on the relay began. Blinding streaks of interference tore across the hull, shields flaring with searing arcs of energy. Crewmen shouted, alarms screamed, and in that chaos, every instinct was tested to its limit. The Etherian spun, dodged, fired, retreated, and advanced again. An intricate dance with an enemy that existed partly beyond perception. Minutes, or was it seconds? Later, the first counterintuitive pattern became evident. The entities avoided areas where probability lines converged with high variance, leaving gaps that were exploitable if one moved unpredictably. Thorn noticed it immediately, his tactical mind calculating the permutations. "We'll bait them," he said, voice low and commanding. "We'll lure them into a trap where their prediction fails. Ilara, can you stabilize the vector nodes?" "I can try," she replied, sweat beading at her brow. "But it's risky. One miscalculation, and the nodes could overload, collapsing a local quantum field. Could be catastrophic." Thorn nodded once, sharply. "Risk is survival. Prepare the maneuver. Now." As the Etherian executed the first deliberate gambit, twisting through impossible arcs of space, every crew member held their breath. Missiles vanished, returned, and sometimes detonated in patterns that seemed deliberately designed to confuse. Yet the ship's unpredictable maneuvers, combined with Ilara's phased vectors, caused a ripple that the entities could not immediately adapt to. A burst of heat across the hull signaled minor damage, sparks falling from the deck, but the relay remained intact. Mira's eyes widened at the monitor. They're hesitating. The pattern is faltering. Thorn allowed himself the smallest of smiles. It was the first victory, small and fleeting but tangible, a foothold in a war that transcended conventional comprehension. But as the crew exhaled, regrouped, and recalibrated, the last warning came, not from the sensors, not from the displays, but from the subtle shift in the ship itself. Reality flickered. The walls of the Etherian trembled. Light bent unnaturally. Somewhere within the lattice of existence, the entities had learned. An adaptation was coming. Thorn's voice cut through the mounting dread, calm and unyielding. "Brace for the next wave. They'll be faster, smarter, and we'll be ready. Because if we don't hold, there won't just be a battle lost. There will be no certainty left to fight for." The bridge went silent again, the crew bracing for a confrontation that would test the limits of courage, strategy, and human ingenuity. Outside, the rift shimmered, infinite, unknowable, and the war across possibilities had only just begun. The Etherian tore through the fracturing currents of the Solstice Rift, every fiber of the vessel straining against the distortions that threatened to snap reality like fine silk. Captain Thorn gripped the command rail, muscles taut, eyes darting between the flickering displays. The interference was no longer just a distant anomaly. It had begun to insinuate itself into the ship's own systems, bending the probability of circuitry, creating phantom readings, and occasionally, for brief heartbeats, making entire corridors shimmer with ghostlight. Ilara Voss crouched over the main console, sweat streaking her temples. Her fingers flew across the interface, feeding layered algorithms into the quantum field stabilizers. Each keystroke carried the weight of imminent catastrophe. A single misalignment could propagate an errant probability collapse throughout the ship. "The nodes are holding," she muttered, voice tense, but only marginally. "Every firing solution, every maneuver, it's going to have to account for 3 layers of temporal variance. One error, and the vectors will self-destruct." Commander Soren Kale tapped his tablet furiously, overlaying tactical maps with real-time anomaly data. "Captain, we've lost contact with 2 of the outer drones. Mira confirms the probability distortions ate them. The patterns are learning from our movements. Each drone we lose tightens their predictive algorithms. We can't just throw resources at this." Thorn's jaw tightened. "Then we improvise. Mira, run the simulation. Find the gaps in their predictive overlay. We go in blind where they expect precision, and precise where they expect chaos. Lieutenant Mira Juno's fingers danced across her controls, her voice a sharp whisper in the tense bridge. I'm seeing a secondary resonance field. Interference patterns that contradict our last engagement. It's forming faster than we anticipated. If we hit the relay before they stabilize this, it might cascade into a feedback loop. Feedback loop? Thorne's tone brooked no uncertainty. It could destabilize the interference entirely, like forcing a storm to collapse on itself. But if it fails, the rift could consume sections of the Etherean. The silence that followed was thick, heavy with the knowledge that human lives were tethered to the balance of abstract physics. Then Thorne exhaled sharply. Do it. Every calculated risk is better than inaction. The ship veered into the predicted nodes of vulnerability. Outside the reinforced viewport, the rift shimmered like liquid mercury, waves of impossible light twisting and folding in ways that made the stomach churn. Systems flickered, reality bent, and every crew member felt the subtle pull of instability at their core. The first wave of interference hit, slamming against the ship's shields with ghostly force. The hull shivered as energy arcs snaked across the deck, leaving trails of static in the air. Alara's voice cut through the alarms. Vector node alignment at 70%. Realign to Delta Phase 3.5. Soren Kale barked orders, his voice slicing through the chaos. Divert auxiliary shields to lateral matrices. Mira, engage counterphase drone feed. We need ghost signals to mask our movement. No real weapon deployment until the field stabilizes. The Etherean twisted and spun, evasive arcs designed to keep the probability entities off balance. Drones deployed in erratic, unpredictable patterns, some vanishing mid-flight only to reappear along blind spots, feeding false telemetry to the adaptive interference. Every calculated movement was a gamble, every delay a potential death sentence. Minutes stretched into eternities. Then came the first human cost. Sensor reports flickered out for Ensign Duran and his tactical squad, lost somewhere in the phasing currents. The bridge fell silent as the crew processed the loss. Thorne's expression hardened. Survival demanded emotional compartmentalization. Every life mattered, yet hesitation would cost them all. Alara's voice trembled slightly, betraying the strain of long hours in an environment that distorted perception itself. The secondary resonance field is reaching critical threshold. We have a 5-second window for deployment. Thorne nodded once. Do it! The Etherean surged forward. Alara synchronized the quantum stabilizers, forcing the field into a feedback loop that rippled through the rift. The outside shimmered violently. Anomalies twisted, fractured, and then collapsed inwards. The interference entities recoiled, and for the first time, the crew saw a tangible victory. Space itself had obeyed their gambit, however briefly, but the cost was immediate. The ship shuddered violently as localized distortions cascaded through the hull. Crew members were thrown off balance, alarms screamed of failing subsystems, and the temperature rose sharply in affected compartments. Mira shouted through the comms. Hull integrity at 67%. Systems overheating. If we don't vent the quantum stabilizers now, we risk critical meltdown. Thorne's hand slammed down on the console. Vents open. Stabilize the reactors manually if you have to. Every second counts. Soren Kell coordinated with the engineering teams, rerouting power through unconventional channels, sacrificing auxiliary systems to preserve the main drive and shields. Sparks flew as panels burned out, yet the relay remained intact, the feedback loop holding the rift at bay. Alara exhaled shakily, the first real sign of relief since the engagement began. We did it. The relay is safe for now, but they've learned from every pattern we used. Our advantage is temporary. Their next adaptation will be faster, smarter. Thorne scanned the reports, noting subtle discrepancies in the interference residuals. We've won this round, he said quietly. But the war's just beginning, and we've already paid a price. The political ramifications of the rift engagement were immediate. Communications with the Command Council were brief and tense. Ambassador Lyra Kane's voice carried over the secure channel, cool and deliberate. Captain, the Council demands a full assessment. Loss of personnel and equipment cannot continue without accountability. Thorne leaned back, jaw tight. We faced an enemy beyond conventional comprehension, Ambassador. Accountability exists only if survival exists first. Lyra's voice sharpened, unyielding. Survival cannot justify reckless risk indefinitely. Your crew, your assets, are part of a larger strategy. Fail here, and you jeopardize far more than a single ship. Kale muttered under his breath. Far more than we can measure. Alara, adjusting the quantum stabilizers for the next wave, shot a glance at Thorne. They're right. Every maneuver has a cost. But if we hesitate, the rift consumes everything. We can't wait for permission to survive. Thorne's hand hovered over the tactical console. We operate within constraints, yes, but we do not surrender initiative. That's the difference between command and bureaucracy. We adapt or we die. Simple as that. The next days became a brutal calculus of survival. Every sortie into the rift was measured in milliseconds of advantage, every engagement a dance of probability and prediction. Crew rotations were shortened, stress compounded, and the mental strain began to show. Lieutenant Mira Juno, once a fearless drone pilot, found herself pausing before decisions, questioning every maneuver against entities whose logic often defied comprehension. In a rare moment of calm, she confided to Alara, "Do you ever wonder if we're even real to them? Or just shadows in their calculations?" Alara's eyes flickered to the quantum displays, reflecting the fractal shimmer of overlapping possibilities. "Doesn't matter. Real or not, we exist enough to fight. That's all that counts." Meanwhile, intelligence breakthroughs began to emerge. By cross-referencing interference signatures with environmental anomalies and phase vector deviations, Alara identified a subtle asymmetry in the entity's predictive algorithms. They could anticipate linear sequences with frightening precision, but their adaptation to chaotic, nonlinear variables lagged just enough to create exploitable gaps. Thorn convened the bridge for a strategic review. We hit them where they expect order, and we hide in chaos where they expect precision. Every drone, every maneuver, every weapon deployment must follow this principle. "This is no longer just defense, it's a counteroffensive," Kale interjected, eyes flicking across the tactical readouts. "Captain, implementing this requires risking additional exposure to unstable fields. Casualties will rise. Non-essential systems may fail. Our fuel and power margins are already thin." Thorn's expression was unyielding. "Acknowledged. But inaction guarantees extinction. Prepare the crew. We move at first opportunity." The opportunity arrived sooner than expected. A resonance spike across the relay suggested an external vector, another interference front, previously undetected. The anomaly pulsed like a heartbeat, sending the Etherian's crew into immediate action. Shields were reinforced, stabilizers synchronized, and every predictive model recalculated in real time. As the vessel approached, the interference intensified. Space bent unnaturally, and crewmen described the sensation of walking through a dream or a nightmare. Lasers fired at locations that didn't exist in conventional space. Missiles vanished only to strike from impossible angles, and the ship's hull groaned under the pressure of localized probability collapses. Yet this time, the asymmetry was leveraged. Alara's calculations anticipated the entity's overreach. The Etherian performed erratic maneuvers that were simultaneously precise, deploying decoy drones and interference nodes to disrupt the enemy's prediction stream. The entities, adapting too slowly to nonlinear chaos, faltered in their assault. Missiles detonated harmlessly in empty space, and a carefully timed quantum pulse destabilized one of the approaching interference waves. Thorn allowed a brief, grim smile. "We bought time." But as the ship shuddered from the strain, a warning flashed across Kale's display. "Captain, anomaly detected inside the hull. Localized probability collapse, engineering deck. It's spreading fast. If not contained, it could compromise the stabilizers we just deployed." Thorn's face hardened. "Contain it. Now." The crew moved with surgical precision, sacrificing auxiliary systems and venting sections of the ship to prevent cascade failure. Sparks flew, alarms screamed, and the deck trembled, but containment was achieved just as the interference began to recede. Exhausted, but alive, the crew took stock. Casualties had mounted. Systems were battered, but the relay remained intact. The rift was temporarily stabilized, and for the first time, they had concrete evidence that the interference entities could be countered, if not defeated. Thorn, leaning against the command rail, looked out at the churning, impossible currents of the rift. "We survived this round," he said quietly. "But the entities are learning faster than we are. We adapt again, or we die next time. And next time, they'll come prepared for us." Alara adjusted the stabilizers one final time, eyes scanning the residual interference. "They're more than just theory, but so are we." Mira, exhaustion etched on her features, muttered, "We're not just fighting them. We're racing ourselves, and in the heart of the Etherian, with probability bending and reality itself trembling, the human crew understood one immutable truth. Survival was no longer a matter of strength or numbers. It was a matter of ingenuity, courage, and the relentless will to confront the impossible. Yet, outside the ship, deep in the shifting currents of the rift, the interference entities pulsed, analyzed, and adapted, preparing for the next encounter, faster and smarter than ever before. The Etherian moved cautiously through the residual turbulence of the Solstice Rift, the aftermath of their recent engagement still rippling through the surrounding space. Systems hummed under the strain of constant recalibration, auxiliary generators overheating even as the crew patched critical subsystems. Captain Thorne surveyed the tactical displays, each flicker of interference a reminder that the entities were learning at a frightening pace. Their first victories had been small, measured, but they had come at a steep cost. Crew casualties, structural fatigue, and the creeping realization that conventional logic no longer applied weighed heavily on him. Commander Kale's fingers danced across the console, overlaying newly collected interference data with the previous vector maps. "Captain, we've identified weak points in the entity's predictive algorithms. Their anticipatory logic functions linearly. They falter when faced with non-sequential variables. We can exploit that, but it will require us to operate deep inside the rift on their terms." Thorne's gaze hardened. "Deep inside?" That's nearly suicidal. We've lost good people already, Soren. Captain, Cal countered, voice sharp but controlled. We have no alternative. Their expansion will cut off relay communications if we hesitate. We strike now, or we give them free rein to restructure reality in ways we can't anticipate. Dr. Ilara Voss leaned over her console, scanning streams of quantum flux data. I've developed a phased disruption matrix, she said, voice low but steady. It's designed to overload their predictive logic by introducing controlled anomalies in probability space. The problem is, deploying it requires penetrating interference nodes at extremely high risk. One miscalculation, and the Etherian could be caught in a cascading phase collapse. Lieutenant Mira Juno, reviewing the tactical drone feeds, spoke up. And the relay? We can't afford to let the secondary interference front consolidate. Every moment we delay gives them time to adapt further. Thorne exhaled, jaw tightening. We've adapted to survive. Now we must adapt to attack. Kale, map the optimal insertion points. Lara, prepare the phased matrix. Mira, position the drones for reconnaissance and decoy feeds. We're going in! The ship descended deeper into the rift, the surrounding quantum currents twisting and folding in impossible geometries. Time itself seemed fluid here, stretching and contracting in ways the crew could feel in their bones. Hull sensors reported minor but alarming fluctuations. Hallways seemed to warp, lights flickered in impossible sequences, and localized gravity vectors occasionally spiked and vanished. The first objective was a cluster of interference, nodes forming a lattice around. What Kale identified as a relay anchor, a focal point, where the entities consolidated their predictive field. The plan was to infiltrate the lattice, deploy the phased disruption matrix, and destabilize the network long enough to allow targeted strikes against their logistics pathways. As the Etherian approached the lattice, the first wave of active interference struck. Beams of unstable energy lanced through space, phasing unpredictably and striking the ship's shields with bursts that seemed to materialize out of nowhere. The crew reacted instinctively, shields diverting, thrusters adjusting, decoy drones moving in patterns designed to fragment the entity's calculations. Alara's hands flew over the controls, syncing the phased matrix with the ship's navigation systems. Insertion coordinates set. Deploying decoys now. Drones flared into erratic, impossible arcs, vanishing only to reappear at untraceable points. Missiles were fired in patterns designed to confuse the entity's anticipatory logic, some detonating harmlessly to produce controlled feedback in the quantum field. The interference pulses slowed, hesitated, enough to create a narrow window for the Etherian to penetrate the lattice. Inside the lattice, the interference became disorienting. Sensors fluctuated, gravity pulses destabilized movement, and every corridor seemed to fold back upon itself. Crew members experienced fleeting hallucinations, visions of themselves in alternate versions of the ship, running endless cycles of the same engagement. Thorne forced himself to focus on concrete input, vectors, shields, trajectories. Reality could bend, but instinct, training, and careful calculation remained their only constants. The insertion point was reached. Alara initiated the phased disruption matrix. A pulse of quantum energy radiated outward, saturating the interference lattice. The entities reacted instantly, their predictive patterns flickering and faltering. For a brief, crucial moment, the lattice was destabilized, fractures appeared, pathways opened, and the Etherian could strike at the logistical nodes supporting the interference. Kyle deployed the first wave of attacks. Kinetic drones targeting relay conduits, electromagnetic pulses disabling auxiliary energy nodes. The entities responded unpredictably, sending localized interference bursts, but the phased matrix forced them into reactive patterns, slowing their adaptation. Yet victory came at a high price. A sudden spike of phase collapse ripped through the port engine section. Alarms screamed, structural panels buckled, and crewmen were thrown against the deck. Mira's voice cut sharply across the bridge comms. Hull breach! Secondary reactor compromised. Evacuate non-essential sectors. Thorne barked orders, precise and unyielding. Engineering contain the breach. Divert auxiliary power to shields and main drive. Soren, recalibrate drone vectors. Maximize decoy efficiency. Alara, stabilize the phased matrix or we're all dead. Crewmen moved with grim efficiency, sealing breaches, rerouting power, and manually stabilizing critical systems. Sparks flew, the smell of ozone burned the air, and the deck vibrated violently. Every heartbeat carried the potential for catastrophe. During the chaos, intelligence gleaned from the nodes revealed a shocking truth. The entities were not a single unified intelligence. They were a distributed network of adaptive consciousnesses, each capable of independent calculation, yet linked to a central resonance. Destroying the lattice would cripple them temporarily, but the core of their adaptive network remained elusive, hidden deeper in the rift. Thorne's face darkened. So the relay was bait. They've drawn us into the lattice to expose our tactics. And now they're preparing the next wave. Kale's voice was grim. Exactly. The nodes we targeted were expendable. Their adaptive algorithm is evolving faster than our simulations predicted. We've forced them to reveal their structure, but it comes at the cost of exposing ourselves. Alara's hands never stopped moving over the console. We can exploit this. If we can anticipate their next consolidation point, we can set another trap, use the lattice as a funnel for their own interference pulses. But it's dangerous. One misstep and the Etherian won't survive. Thorn's eyes scanned the tactical map. Dangerous is our default. Prepare the next operation. Every move from here on out must be calculated to precision, but with the flexibility to improvise. The next strike must cripple them, or we risk losing everything. As the crew reorganized, a more immediate threat emerged. Communications picked up a signal, a transmission from what appeared to be a human vessel trapped in the rift, its signature distorted but recognizable. The vessel's message was fragmented, its crew begging for extraction. Alara analyzed the quantum overlay and identified something chilling. The transmission had been manipulated. Portions of probability reality had been subtly rewritten, altering their language, intentions, and even the crew's memories of events. Thorn's expression tightened. They're playing with reality itself. Any rescue attempt is a potential trap, but we can't ignore them. Prepare an interception team, small, highly mobile. We'll extract them while minimizing exposure. The mission was brutal. Shuttles weaved through corridors of fluctuating gravity, dodging localized interference spikes. Drones provided cover, but every movement risked cascading phase collapse. Crew members experienced overlapping versions of themselves, momentarily frozen in conflicting sequences of action and consequence. Lieutenant Mira led the shuttles, every instinct honed to counter impossible odds. "Stay with me," she whispered into the comms, voice steady despite the surreal environment. "If we deviate from the path, we vanish." Thorn coordinated from the bridge, recalculating trajectories, redirecting energy to propulsion and shields in real time. The extraction team reached the stranded vessel, only to find the crew disoriented, some partially desynchronized from reality itself. Medics worked quickly, stabilizing them while Mira maneuvered through interference bursts that seemed to anticipate every turn. Just as the last shuttle cleared the interference lattice, a sharp pulse struck the Etherian. The lattice, reacting to their intrusion, collapsed into an accelerated convergence. Time around the ship skewed, seconds elongated, then snapped, every movement staggered in unpredictable intervals. The ship shuddered violently, hull panels buckled, and alarms screamed across every deck. Thorn shouted orders, voice cutting through the chaos. "All power to main shields. Evade on Vector Gamma 4. Maintain phase disruption matrix at full output." Alara's fingers flew across the console, syncing the matrix with the ship's engines. Sparks arced from overloaded conduits, but the Etherian responded, twisting through the warped space with impossible precision. The interference lattice fractured around them, collapsing into localized voids that temporarily neutralized the entity's predictive advantage. As calm began to settle, a new, horrifying discovery emerged. Analysis of the rescued crew and the interference residuals revealed that one of their own had been compromised, subtly rewritten in probability space, their memories and loyalty partially overwritten. The betrayal was invisible but insidious, a ghost among them who could provide the entities with predictive insight. Thorn's voice was a low growl. "We've survived the lattice. We've extracted the crew. But we now have an enemy inside our own ranks. Identify the compromised individual. Every move from here must assume betrayal at the highest level." Alara's eyes widened. "It's worse than we thought. Probability traces suggest the overwrite isn't static. They can adapt it dynamically, potentially affecting multiple personnel simultaneously." Kale's voice was tight. "The entities are evolving. Every tactic we use to survive is now being used against us, inside the ship itself. We've won battles, Captain. But we may be losing the war." Thorn's expression hardened. "Then we adapt faster. We improvise smarter. We anticipate the unseen, and we strike at the core. Every sacrifice, every calculated risk, it all leads to the decisive move. Prepare for the offensive. We don't retreat. Not now. Not ever." Outside the ship, the Solstice Rift pulsed with untamed chaotic light. Within, the Etherian's crew readied themselves for the coming storm, a battle that would test their loyalty, ingenuity, and the very limits of human resilience. And deep within the lattice of the interference network, the entities watched, learned, and recalculated, faster, smarter, waiting. The Etherian had barely recovered from the lattice engagement when sensors detected the emergence of a concentrated interference nexus deep within the rift, a location Kale identified as the likely hub of the entity network. The readings were staggering, overlapping probability layers, dense quantum flux, and distortions that made even light seem uncertain. Captain Thorne knew the risks, yet the opportunity was too critical to ignore. Strike here, and the interference might be crippled. Hesitate, and the entities could expand beyond control, consuming relay systems and destabilizing countless adjacent sectors. Thorne convened his officers in the bridge, the hum of failing systems, a stark reminder of their precarious position. "We go in together," he said, voice low but commanding. "All teams, offensive, engineering, and drone operations must synchronize. Every movement calculated, every contingency covered. This is the decisive strike." Alara adjusted the phased disruption matrix, her hand steady despite the exhaustion etched into her face. I've upgraded the matrix to exploit the dynamic weak points we observed during the lattice collapse. It's capable of inducing cascading probability misalignment in the nexus, but timing is critical. One misstep, and the field could collapse on us. Mira Juno's voice was taut with tension. I've mapped multiple insertion vectors. We'll need to move along erratic trajectories to prevent prediction, deploying decoy drones and quantum signatures to mask our approach. Any miscalculation and the interference can phase us out of reality entirely. Kale nodded, overlaying drone patterns with navigation nodes. We coordinate in 3 layers. Offensive strike, decoy interference, and reactive stabilizers. Each must function independently, but interlock precisely. Otherwise, we fail. The Ethereum descended into the nexus zone, the quantum currents outside bending reality into impossible geometries. Lights flickered along the decks, gravity oscillated unpredictably, and the hull vibrated with unseen forces. Crew members felt the disorientation immediately. Time stretched, contracted, and folded, creating fleeting hallucinations that overlapped with glimpses of alternate outcomes. The first wave of interference hit with ferocious precision. Beams of quantum energy lanced across the ship, phasing unpredictably, striking shields at angles that seemed impossible to reconcile. Alarms screamed, structural stress indicators flared, and crewmen moved as if underwater, their reaction slowed by the warped physics. Alara's fingers danced over the matrix controls. Phase stabilization at 75%. Engaging countervectors. The ship responded, twisting through warped corridors of space-time, decoy drones moving in erratic arcs, missiles deployed in unpredictable patterns to fragment the entity's predictive algorithms. For brief moments, the Ethereum carved a path of partial control through the nexus, exploiting the entity's lag and adapting to non-linear variables. Thorn coordinated from the bridge, his commands precise. Power to main shields. Divert auxiliary reactors to lateral matrices. Kale, monitor decoy efficiency, adjust in real time. Mira, maintain unpredictable trajectories. The offensive gambit succeeded initially. Sections of the nexus destabilized, feedback loops forming within the interference network. Quantum pulses ricocheted through the lattice, fracturing it into semi-stable voids. The entities responded with violent, unpredictable surges, but the Ethereum held its course, every move calculated to exploit weakness while minimizing exposure. Yet victory came at immediate cost. An unforeseen cascade in the portside stabilizers caused a minor hull breach near the engine core. Sparks erupted, alarms shrieked, and engineering personnel were forced to perform manual stabilization amidst fluctuating gravity and shifting corridors. Contain the breach, Thorn barked. Divert all non-essential power to shields and propulsion. Alara, maintain phased matrix at critical levels. Crew members moved with grim precision, sacrificing auxiliary systems to preserve the main engines and defensive arrays. Each second stretched interminably as the Ethereum navigated through the collapsing interference lattice. Amid the chaos, a critical discovery emerged. Analysis of interference patterns revealed that a segment of the entity network was not just adaptive. It exhibited rudimentary sentience. Certain subnodes demonstrated anticipatory behavior based on crew decisions, predicting and countering maneuvers not yet executed. This realization sent a ripple of tension through the bridge. They were no longer confronting random quantum phenomena, but a distributed intelligence capable of strategic thought. Thorn absorbed the implication. This is no longer a tactical engagement. It's a war of minds. Every move must be calculated not just against force, but against foresight. Kale, prepare offensive vectors assuming sentience. Alara, factor predictive countermeasures into the matrix. The decisive moment came when the Ethereum reached the core nexus, a dense, pulsating lattice of overlapping realities. The ship's phased disruption matrix activated fully, radiating controlled anomalies into the network. The interference entities reacted instantly, sending concentrated bursts of quantum energy, warping the ship and creating near-instantaneous cascading distortions. Crewmen gritted their teeth, bracing against fluctuating gravity as lights fractured into multiple overlapping sequences. Sensors reported false readings, corridors folded back on themselves, and each crew member saw fleeting images of themselves in multiple locations simultaneously. Mira's voice cut through the chaos. Trajectory stable. We're inside the predicted collapse corridor. Deploy decoy drones now. Drones erupted into erratic paths, vanishing and reappearing in impossible sequences, fragmenting the entity's prediction algorithms. Kinetic strikes, synchronized with the phased matrix, targeted the Nexus's logistical nodes, causing temporary systemic collapse. For the first time, the Ethereum gained tangible leverage, but the victory was Pyrrhic. During the engagement, it became clear that one of their own had been compromised. The probability overwrite detected in Part 3 was now active. Subtle shifts in behavior, misaligned commands, and altered decision patterns revealed that a crew member was acting in alignment with the entity's adaptive network. Thorn's jaw tightened. Identify the compromised individual. Every move from here on assumes betrayal. Alara traced anomalies through the internal systems, detecting probability distortions originating from the engineering sector. "It's Kale," she gasped. "He's partially overwritten. His decisions are being influenced to feed predictive insight to the entities." Thorn's eyes went cold. "Contain him. Isolate any channels he could be using to relay information. Mira, maintain full surveillance." Kale's face remained unreadable, though subtle glitches in his behavior betrayed the influence. He continued issuing commands, but every action carried the risk of unintentionally feeding the entity's critical data. The core nexus surged, the lattice pulsating with energy. Thorn issued a command with grim decisiveness. "We finish this. Contain Kale, maintain the phased disruption, and push through the core." No hesitation. Engineering teams worked feverishly to stabilize the hull as the ship pierced the heart of the nexus. Phased disruption pulses radiated outward, fracturing interference strands, collapsing auxiliary nodes, and destabilizing the core lattice. The entities reacted violently, sending concentrated bursts that bent reality around the Etherean, but the crew pressed on, exploiting every observed lag in adaptive response. The climax was a brutal ballet of physics and probability. Gravity oscillated unpredictably. Light fractured into overlapping spectrums, and every step demanded instantaneous calculation. Crew members moved with near-inhuman precision, executing emergency stabilizations, deploying decoys, and countering interference in perfect synchrony. Finally, the nexus fractured. Pulses of quantum energy detonated outward in controlled cascades, collapsing interference nodes into semi-stable voids. The core resonance, what Alara had identified as the central intelligence locus, shimmered violently, then fragmented. The ship shuddered violently, systems straining to maintain integrity. Alarms screamed, lights fractured, and crew members gritted their teeth against the temporal distortion. Then, just as suddenly, the lattice went still. The interference had been neutralized, at least temporarily. Thorn exhaled, his body trembling with exhaustion. "Status report." Alara's fingers flew over the controls. "Core nexus destabilized. Phased disruption matrix holding. Lateral interference minimal. Kale is contained, but partially overwritten. We've won the engagement, but the entities may not be destroyed, only fragmented." Mira's voice was tight, but steadier. "We've survived. Extraction is possible. The crew we rescued in Part 3 are stable." Thorn allowed a brief, grim smile. "Victory comes at a cost. We've neutralized the immediate threat, but the war is far from over." In the aftermath, the Etherean limped through the rift, battered but intact. Repairs were underway, and the crew moved with quiet, deliberate efficiency. The psychological toll was immense. Each member carried the weight of exhaustion, the near-constant brush with temporal collapse, and the knowledge that a colleague had been compromised. Yet they were alive. Alara surveyed the residual interference patterns. "They're fragmented, yes, but adaptive nodes remain. If left unchecked, they could reassemble, potentially more sophisticated than before." Thorn nodded grimly. "Then we take this knowledge and prepare. We've learned the patterns, the weaknesses, and the costs. Next time, we finish what we started. Discipline, coordination, sacrifice. That is our path forward." As the Etherean drifted through the stabilizing currents of the rift, a quiet understanding settled over the crew. The entities had been challenged, but not eliminated. Each victory revealed new risks, new complexities, and new moral calculations. And deep within the shadows of probability, the fragments of the entities pulsed, adaptive and watchful, waiting for the next encounter, while the humans, gritty, determined, and relentlessly inventive, prepared for the ultimate confrontation. The Etherean drifted into the heart of the rift one final time, engines humming at near-critical thresholds, hull scarred and crew exhausted beyond endurance. The core nexus, shattered but not defeated, loomed ahead like a fractured star, its pulsing lattice of overlapping realities twisting unpredictably. Captain Thorn's jaw was tight, his eyes scanning the tactical arrays for any sign of adaptive response. Every lesson learned, every casualty, every improvisation from the previous engagements coalesced into a singular purpose: end this threat, decisively and comprehensively, or perish trying. Alara Voss ran final simulations on the phased disruption matrix, her fingers flying over the controls with a speed born of desperation and exhaustion. "I've synchronized the matrix with the main drive and auxiliary shields," she said, voice tight. "If we can maintain coherence through the core nexus, the pulses will induce total destabilization of the remaining interference nodes. It's a one-way shot. Any failure, and the Etherean collapses with it." Mira Juno's eyes flicked over the navigational readouts. Trajectories mapped. Drones and decoys positioned along erratic vectors. "But we'll be exposed for approximately 30 seconds of real time, longer if any system falters. The entities may attempt countermeasures within milliseconds." Thorn nodded, jaw set. 30 seconds of exposure. That's all we need. Kyle? The compromised commander remained in isolation, monitored closely by Alara. His probability overwrite had been contained but not fully neutralized. "I can provide predictive overlay support," he said, voice careful. "But any misalignment, and I risk feeding them insight again." Thorn met his eyes evenly. You'll take the risk. One calculation can save hundreds, or doom us all. No hesitation. The ship surged forward, engines flaring, as the Etherean pierced the unstable currents surrounding the core nexus. Time, space, and light bent unnaturally around the hull. Gravity oscillated violently. Hallways warped, shimmered, and sometimes appeared to fold in on themselves. Crew members pressed themselves against railings, every movement calculated, every step critical. Alara's hands never stopped moving. Phase alignment at 90%, 85, 80. Maintain vector coherence. Outside, the fractured lattice pulsed violently, the remaining interference nodes attempting rapid adaptive response. Energy beams arced unpredictably, phasing through shields with chaotic precision. The matrix pulses, synchronized with the ship's movements, fragmented the adaptive nodes. Drone decoys flared into impossible arcs, creating false targets, luring the entity's calculations away from the ship's true trajectory. Mira's voice was calm but sharp. Trajectory stable. 50 seconds of exposure. Adjust decoys. Engage lateral interference shields at max. Timing critical. Do not deviate. The core nexus began to react violently. Fractures in the lattice radiated outward, generating unpredictable surges of quantum energy. Panels buckled, hull stress indicators screamed, and localized gravity spikes threw crew members against the deck. Sparks arced from overloaded conduits. The Etherean shuddered, its systems straining to maintain structural integrity. Thorn's voice cut through the alarms. Power to main shields. Divert auxiliary reactors to stabilizers. Kale, maintain predictive overlays. Override only if strictly necessary. The ship twisted, banking at impossible angles, as the phased disruption matrix initiated a synchronized cascade. Each pulse destabilized the lattice further, inducing localized phase collapse within the interference nodes. The entities reacted instantly, sending bursts of energy and predictive waves, but the decoys, combined with the non-linear trajectories, forced miscalculations. For the first time, the nexus exhibited cracks, minor at first, but growing rapidly. Then came the most dangerous moment. One surge, more intense than anticipated, struck the main drive, threatening to sever propulsion and plunge the ship into uncontained phase collapse. Sparks flew along the command deck. Alarms shrieked, panels buckled, and the air thrummed with the stress of extreme quantum distortion. Alara's voice cut through the chaos. Stabilizers at critical. Manual override required. I need engineering teams to reroute auxiliary power directly to the matrix and shield simultaneously. Engineering personnel moved with practiced precision through fluctuating gravity corridors. Every handhold, every step, had to account for the reality-warping distortions. Sparks arced, hull panels groaned, and for brief moments, it seemed as if the very structure of the ship would tear apart. Yet, one by one, the systems came back online, synchronized just enough to sustain propulsion and maintain matrix coherence. The core nexus began to fracture irreversibly. The pulses propagated, cascading through the remaining nodes. The interference entities, adaptive as they were, could not compensate for the coordinated assault across multiple layers of probability. Reality itself trembled, shifting violently around the Etherean before settling into a new equilibrium. Thorn watched the tactical arrays as residual interference signals faded. Report, he demanded. Alara's hands hovered over the controls, breath ragged. Core nexus destabilized. Phased disruption matrix sustained coherence throughout the engagement. Remaining nodes fragmented. Entity's adaptive network neutralized for now, Mir added, voice tense but steady. No immediate threats detected. Drones report all decoys deployed successfully. Probability anomalies decreasing steadily. Kale, still contained but contributing, spoke quietly. The entities are dormant, fractured, but fragments remain. They may reconstitute over time. What we've done is decisive, but not absolute. Thorn's eyes were hard yet reflective. We've bought ourselves a window. One we will use to repair, regroup, and prepare for their next move. We've won the engagement, neutralized the immediate threat, and preserved the relay network. That is victory in its purest form. Crew members moved through the Etherean, assessing damage, performing repairs, and tending to minor injuries. The bridge was battered but operational, the atmosphere heavy with exhaustion and the lingering hum of reality's recovery from the near-catastrophic distortions. Alara, surveying the residual interference patterns, noted subtle anomalies. Fragments remain, she said softly. Not enough to mount full-scale counterattacks, but the entities have evolved. They will not be defeated permanently. They will adapt further, smarter, faster. Thorn nodded. And so will we. Humanity adapts. We endure, we innovate. That is how we survive. By discipline, coordination, and relentless effort. Nothing else will suffice. In the aftermath, the surviving crew gathered in the observation deck. They looked out at the fractured, stabilizing rift, the remnants of the core nexus shimmering faintly in the distance. No one spoke at first. The silence was heavy with relief, exhaustion, and grief for the fallen. Alara broke the silence. We've seen things no human has ever seen. Probability manipulated, reality bent, consciousness fractured. And we survived. That is extraordinary, Mira added quietly. Extraordinary, yes. But it changes everything. We know now that survival is not enough. We must be ready for the next time. And the next. And the next. Thorne's eyes swept the deck, resting on every crew member who had endured the impossible. Then we prepare. We train. We adapt. And we never forget the cost. Each life lost, each fracture in the hull, every moment we hesitated, they all inform our doctrine, our strategy, our resolve. We are human. That is our advantage. That is our strength. In the days that followed, the Etherean limped toward the nearest secure relay, carrying both the wounded and the knowledge of the entity's fractured network. Systems were repaired, morale slowly rebuilt, and the crew documented every anomaly, every adaptive response, every improvisation that had saved them. Kyle, monitored continuously, began the slow process of reintegration. His probability overwrite gradually neutralized. He spoke little, but when he did, his words reflected the weight of the near betrayal and the shared understanding of survival through extreme adversity. The rift remained unstable, a constant reminder that the entities were not gone, merely scattered, learning, and biding time. But the humans had proven something crucial. Discipline, ingenuity, and coordinated action could prevail against forces that defied conventional understanding. They had faced adaptive intelligence, navigated impossible physics, and endured the psychological toll of reality itself bending against them, and they had emerged intact, battle-hardened and wiser. Alara stood at the observation deck, hands resting on the railing. The fractured lattice shimmered faintly in the distance, a reminder of the entity's lingering presence. "They will return," she said softly, "but we are ready. Every system, every maneuver, every human instinct has been sharpened. Next time, we will finish it." Thorne joined her, eyes scanning the shimmering horizon. "Next time, we take the offensive from the start. They may manipulate reality, bend probability, fracture time, but we have learned to see through the chaos. We've learned to survive, and more importantly, to fight back intelligently. That is how we endure. That is how we win." Mira, standing slightly behind them, added with a faint, grim smile, "We're no longer reacting. We're anticipating, and that changes everything." The Etherean continued its slow journey through the stabilizing rift, crew members working tirelessly, systems humming steadily, and probability itself settling back into a fragile equilibrium. In the hearts of the humans aboard, there was an unshakable certainty, no matter how adaptive, how intelligent, or how alien the entities might be. Human ingenuity, courage, and relentless determination would always find a way to survive, and to prevail. And somewhere, deep in the remnants of the fractured nexus, the interference entities pulsed, aware of the humans' resilience, calculating their next move, adaptive, patient, and now wary of the species that had bested them through sheer will, discipline, and audacious ingenuity.